Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us here today. It's a pleasure to have all of you joining. My name is Thomas Ziegler, and it is my privilege and appreciation to be able to welcome you to this event, the Social Procurement Opportunity. Over the next hour and a bit, we'll be looking through what social procurement is and welcoming questions from all of you. Really, welcome to each of you, and thank you for joining. As I mentioned, my name is Thomas. I'm a project engineer with Altair Engineering, founder of YP Merge and chair of the YBG's team at the ECA, and really excited to be part of the team that's delivering this event for you. Leading into this event, part of what had been such an exciting point to me was really being in connection to the range of individuals that's going to be having an attention to social procurement. Really looking at the range from project initiation, from basically the community's needs, lending itself through to the development agencies, whether that be a private developer or a public developer, all the way through the design team, municipal program, the constructors, and finally, how it impacts the community and the users that the project is intended to benefit. So that's really the representation that we see here today from all of you, connected through the various associations and through YP Merge. So thank you all for joining. And finally, the diversity and representation that we get to celebrate here with benefit of virtual events. We're here grounded in Treaty 6 territory, but we get to welcome participants, panelists from across Alberta and from across Canada. So wherever you're joining from, thank you for being here. The context to this event that I wanted to highlight stems back to the SHIFT conference that occurred in October of 2020, Build Back Better, themed as an opportunity to really try and look into the lens of how businesses can be an agent for good and really be about more than just simply work. And that's what has brought us here today, where we get to focus on a specific subset of that into social procurement. So today's event really, as I mentioned, focuses on the intersection of how work, projects, can all impact and benefit marginalized populations and impact poverty. So throughout the day, we'll be welcoming all of you to be providing feedback, questions, but largely the panel will be led by Brooks, who I'll introduce in a moment. And the format of the panel, we have a variety of themes that we're excited to explore with you, ranging from just a simple introduction into social procurement. We're really starting to get into, start tiptoeing into some of the weeds so that you can be aware of what's coming ahead of you. Please post your questions in the chat. We'll try and monitor them and filter them into the appropriate portions of the event. And if there's something that we can pick up and bring to light, by all means, if it's be by direct message to us or through the Q&A function, please post your questions. So with the front end items out of the way, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. We have a really great slate here ahead of us, some incredible individuals that are active in the social procurement environment. And first off, I'd like to introduce Roger Lockwood, Director of Procurement at the City of Edmonton. He has worked through the ranks of the City of Edmonton in many, many different capacities in procurement since 2007. With this, Roger is keenly aware of everything procurement. It's a fascinating opportunity to really welcome you, Roger, and your insights. So welcome and thank you. Our next panelist is Antonio Gomez Palacio, urban planner with Dialogue from the Toronto area and co-author of the Community Wellbeing Framework. Antonio's position and perspectives today helps elevate the thought and leadership perspectives that stand behind social procurement. So once again, thank you for joining, Antonio. Our next panelist is Tim Caldwell, a familiar face to many of us here in the Edmonton area. Tim Caldwell serves as president of Shandos, an employee-owned organization that features technical builders that are leading change in the Canadian construction industry. Shandos is the first and largest B Corp certified general contractor in North America and lives out many of the values that represent and stand behind social impact and social procurement. And our final, and certainly not least panelist, is Brad Freeman, the People Development and Engagement Coordinator for A&H Steel. Brad's perspectives as a supplier and subtrade is really elevating the conversation of how social procurement works at the ground level. Especially from Brad's perspectives and in his role with A&H, is working at the implementation of their company's values using deliberate coaching strategies and facilitation to really connect the core of their organization to the work that they do. So thank you for joining Brad. And finally, I'll introduce our moderator, Brooks Hanowicz. Thanks for joining so much and for being such a champion on this effect. Brooks is in the middle of so many of these conversations here in Edmonton from End Poverty Edmonton. And it's his role there, he is manager of strategic initiatives, which means he often works at the intersection of eliminating poverty through development of relationships with workforce development groups, expanding procurement potential, and elevating social value. I love that last point there of elevating social value. So on that note, that's all you need to hear from me, and I'll hand it over to Brooks. Take it away.
Hey, Thomas, thanks so much for this. I'm super excited to be here today. As Thomas mentioned, I work with End Poverty Edmonton, and we look at work towards ending poverty within a generation. And part of that is how do you create economic and frankly work opportunities for people currently living in poverty. And as Thomas mentioned, I've had a lot of these conversations and a lot of the conversations with people on this call, on this panel. And I think what's really exciting is that not only do we have an amazing group of panelists, but we're looking at social procurement from a number of different angles. So, I think that's really unique to this conversation, and being able to see this from, a procurement professional like Roger to the companies on the ground that are bidding on contracts, and then having somebody like Antonio looking at a high level. So this is a really unique opportunity, and I'm super excited to be here today. Let's start with just some context setting. Which is, what is social procurement? You're all here today. You signed up for a social procurement webinar, and social procurement is about leveraging social value from existing procurement. So it's a fairly simple definition around how do we use procurement to create social value within our communities, and that can take a number of different looks and approaches. So that can be everything from workforce development, looking at hiring people that maybe face barriers to employment, to looking at the supply chain and hiring from diverse suppliers or social enterprises in our community, or that can take a broader look at community benefits and community benefit agreements and things like that in our communities. But I'm really interested, because we have this diverse panel looking at this from all angles. I'm really interested in looking at what procurement means to you panelists, and particularly from your points of view. So I'm going to start with Antonio. And Antonio, so what does social procurement mean to you, and what does this look like in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of the details today, or dive deep. But at a basic level, in my mind, it's a little bit of the recognition that how we conduct business has a ripple effect within our community, right? And it's the ability to observe that and to look at it carefully. That it's not just about the closed circle of my business, but that these things have a big impact. And in fact, that we can be incredibly intentional around how we do that. We know that the income level of the community is a social determinant of health, right? So we know that these things are incredibly connected to the health of the community. But arguably, and this is, I think, one of the seeds that we're hoping to plant today, that it's also intricately tied to the health of your own business, to the health of our own practices. And think about it, where we were with, say, the concept of sustainability 20 years ago. Everybody kind of had heard about it, but nobody had yet kind of incorporated as a core element of their business. And I'm confident that social procurement will be something that will just become part of the DNA of all businesses in the future, because it has the potential to significantly add to your sense of purpose as a business, which has a huge impact on your recruitment, on the folks that you're bringing forward together. It also has the potential to have a huge impact on the sense of goodwill that is associated with your practice and your business. Ultimately, it also gets associated with the longevity. You're building not just the strength of the communities with which you are, but you're also building the strength of your own people. It's also about positioning, being able to very clearly be in a place where you can be perceived as authentically improving the well-being of folks around you. And ultimately, it's about opening opportunities for people, opportunities for community, and opportunities for yourself. So back to kind of where I started, it really is kind of an acknowledgement and an awareness that how you conduct your business and how you hire and how you procure goods and services has a ripple effect in the community. And it's about being more intentional about that.
Yeah. So, Tim, I'd like you to expand on that. Obviously, there's, kind of the ripple effects in the community and then the impact on your business. So I'm wondering, for you, Tim, what is social procurement mean for Chandos?
Yeah, for us, I would start with it's an opportunity for us to authentically live out our purpose as an organization. There are lots of organizations who run around and talk about purpose or have a plaque on the wall, but the actions don't always align. And so, we did 800 million of sales last year, and we've got a significant supply chain that we control, and we don't have to ask for permission in terms of how we make buying decisions. So should we not, if, equity in the workplace is important to us, should we not promote an equitable supply chain? Should we not push opportunity to people who own members of equity seeking groups who own subcontracting businesses or vendors in our supply chain? Should we not push opportunity to our trade partners who have partnerships with social enterprises and are doing good in the local community? I'm very interested in embedding in the business model of businesses this way of being that addresses a social challenge in society. So, a lot of business leaders think you run the business, you make a profit at the end of the year, you stroke a check, you give it to a charity. And there's a place for that for sure. But if you can embed a solution to societal issues in your actual business model and make more profit by doing that, the sky's the limit. And Michael Porter's well known in the business world as the modern father of strategic thinking. He's been very overt. Larry Fink also has been very overt about the future of differentiation in the business world is solving some of society's greatest problems or challenges. And I think that's the opportunity. It's about purpose and having and using your business model to address societal needs.
Right. Thanks so much, Tim. Brad, I want to turn to you as, in the subcontracting world. What does social procurement mean to you?
Well, Tim pointed to as like company values and purpose. Our purpose is to elevate others. And so social procurement to us is about, I guess I would call it kind of having a social footprint. What are we doing to elevate the people around us? What are we doing to elevate the people within the company? And is it being done in a sustainable way? So, we're limited in as far as goods and services. We cut, bend, and place rebar. It's, there's only so many places to buy steel. The price is for the most part set. And when it comes to people, specifically with our placers, we work very closely with the local union. So, that partnership works really well. We've agreed to a base rate of pay for them, for all of our guys, and they agreed to supply us with top-notch people. Where we run into problems in that particular area, of course, is, there's an aging population of iron workers and there's a slower turnout for new ones. So instead of just looking at it as in we've got to get iron workers and screaming at the union to supply, we start to look at, okay, well, where are there people that could benefit from a really strong, well-developed trade that is well supported by a union and also well supported by local trade schools? And how do we help them get into the trade or look at the trade as a viable option? And that takes more effort than just pitching an idea or putting it out there or putting an ad on Craigslist or Kijiji or whatever and saying, hey, come check us out. We have to get in front of them and we have to show them what it is. And I think social procurement for us is really about that active role in making sure that people understand that there is an option for them. And then on the other side, like I said, the whole footprint idea is that what are we doing as a company that is over and above what our business model is? What are we doing to better the community? Before I even start with A&H, one of the owners said to me, oftentimes we find ourselves in a political climate where they are breaking down barriers for us to grow our business. And with that, we have to identify where the gaps are on a social side of it and look to fill those gaps in any way we can. So to me, it's really about the broader picture of what does that look like.
Right. No, that's great. There's a lot to dig in here, but before we kind of jump back to that, Roger, from the municipal perspective, from the city and a large procurer, what does social procurement mean to you and your department?
So it's got, good morning, by the way, significant impact in terms of, you know, tying into the city's goals in terms of the city plan and really about serving and supporting and building a community that can in, you know, 40 to 50 years support 2 million people. Social procurement's one piece of that can help to build a more diverse and resilient economy within the community of Edmonton. You know, specifically within the procurement area, really it helps us to drive towards those goals within that city plan. It adds economic benefits to the community, helps to keep it within the community. Being a municipal public body, we have trade agreements and rules and policies that we've got to follow. We can't prefer local, but this is one way that we can actually build criteria into our procurements to help support local and help support the community. It actually builds on our existing activities in terms of those procurements and leverages, like it's a significant spend that the city of Edmonton has. But it helps to add that value to the community of Edmonton and really put a focus on it. So really, like the others have said, it helps to support the programs that are here.
Yeah. So thanks so much for that. So I heard a lot of, you know, kind of, I guess, starting into the why question. And I heard Brad, you say, you know, this takes us above and beyond what, you know, what's normally seen in our business. Tim, I heard you say, you know, we're looking to embed this in our business model. So I'm wondering, and maybe we'll start with you, Tim. So, you know, embedding this in the business model, like what is the business case for social procurement? Why is it important to embed this in your business model? You know, Michael Porter and shared value has been around for 20, 30 years maybe now. And so, you know, why is this important as a business case?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of cut right to the chase in terms of my perspective as a general contractor. Now, the business case is going to be different for every business. And the best way I have of really just cutting through it and describing what this is for us is to just have a bit of a riff for a second here. We can employ anyone to be a laborer on our job sites, and the market rate for a laborer might be $18 an hour. Let's hire the kid, the at-risk youth that is riding the bus 3 hours a day back and forth to high school, working 2 minimum wage jobs, trying to put food on the table for a brother or a sister because mom and dad aren't around. And when we hire that kid is very thankful for the opportunity that they've been given, as opposed to in many instances, there's people who think that working in the construction industry is beneath them. So there's this level of thankfulness for an opportunity. And when you give someone a chance, they come to work with a big smile on their face. Their productivity is much higher. We promote that laborer into our apprenticeship programs. We pay for our folks to go to NAIT and SAIT and become apprentice carpenters. And an apprentice carpenter might make 24, 25 bucks an hour on average, depending on what year they are. And Red Seal carpenters make 36, 38, sometimes over $40 an hour straight time, depending on where you are in Canada. And so we can take someone who is on a path towards crime and or poverty and give them a path to a high paying job in the construction industry. And with overtime, those folks will make over 100 grand a year. And it costs us nothing to do that. We were going to go hire those people anyways. We were already paying for the training program and the apprenticeship program. And what we get on the other side of that is we get a highly engaged workforce. And those people, frankly, blow the doors off of everyone else in terms of productivity. Like we actually have to say, it's time to go home. You don't need to work that hard. You know, there's just this huge push in productivity and happiness in the workplace when we do that. We also get a knock-on effect with our superintendents and our managers. You know, we've got a partnership in Edmonton with Norquest, the Alberta Indigenous Construction Career Center. We've hired quite a few folks through that program. And one of our long-serving carpenters said to me, he said, Tim, I've worked on a lot of cool projects, but I have never felt more joy and fulfillment in my life than what I felt when I was working with the Indigenous apprentices on the Heritage Tower that we did with Norquest. And so you get that kind of a dynamic that happens inside of the business. And, you know, our self-performed concrete crews, if they come to work happy and they're super productive, that's 30-40% increase of productivity. So for me, as you know, in the general contracting world, the cold hard ROI on it is joy and satisfaction, employee satisfaction, winning the war for talent, and straight up productivity gains across our self-perform work.
Right. Yeah. And Brad, you know, we've talked obviously outside of this panel about this as well. And you mentioned it, you know, aging workforce and looking for new laborers to come into the steel trades. And so I'm wondering if does that scan for you? Does that make sense? Is that a driver as well? Is there anything when you talk about above and beyond or over and above in the community, like why is that important?
Well, I mean, to speak to what Tim said is that I've had like instructors at NAIT. I've talked to them about how do we get more people in the trade, and I've talked to a few other organizations like, you know, the people at the RAP program, stuff like that. And what I hear sometimes and too often is, you know, we don't even promote the trades. It's not something we promote to the students. So you've got, you know, students who are going to university because that's what they were told to do. You know, when I started out as a mechanic, you know, and when I didn't know what to do in university, my father suggested, hey, well, why don't you go get a trade? At least you can make some money while you figure it out, which really kind of set me up for a good path forward. So when you've got people who are struggling, who want to work and can enter into a trade and get going right away at a decent wage, you know, Tim said what, 20, 23, 24 bucks an hour. I mean, that's consistent with our trade as well. And then school is paid for through the union. And then when we start looking at, when we elevate people, is we found that some of the best people who for us to have as project coordinators and detailers are field guys. They understand rebar. They know how it fits together. They know where the hiccups are, and it works really, really well. So then they can come into the office and then we can support them through to go through school for that as well. So when you look at people who really feel like they're stuck and that there's nowhere to go, and you can paint a picture of like, hey, you know, the sky's the limit. You know, like our one of our longtime employees who's way up in advising the company started in the field. And then before that, though, is you got to get them to that level. So one of the initiatives we looked at is we work with one of the elementary schools in the area that's really struggling financially, and their students are struggling, right? A lot of them are newcomers, English second language. They don't have the basic needs, you know. And so we see as like providing them with winter coats and boots and shoes and contributing to the breakfast program so they're well fed and they can focus on learning. Again, it's like a cyclical thing. Eventually those kids will grow up. Hopefully they'll remember A&H helped them out and they'll be like, yeah, ironworking, sweet. You know, that's the selfish side, but you know, they'll grow up and maybe they will look at the trades, maybe, or maybe they won't, but ultimately it's paving that way right from the get-go. And so that's that idea of starting at the beginning and not just looking just at the we need guys part and be like, let's create a flow of people here that really do want to work in the field and not just looking at it like, oh, well, I got nothing else to do, so why not go be a iron worker, a carpenter, or you know, whatever trade they choose. Right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm thinking that you're really, you know, kind of speaking to those ripple effects that Antonio was talking about at the beginning. So, Antonio, I'm wondering from your perspective, both, I'm interested in the business case for dialogue itself to be, you know, even sitting on a panel like this and talking about social procurement. And then, you know, what are those ripple effects you were talking about in the community? Like, what is that, the benefit to the community that you see from something like social procurement? Because what I'm hearing with Brad's example is a lot of those kind of ripple effects. And I'm wondering if you have some other examples there.
Yeah, and of course, the one that everybody wants to talk about is the pandemic, right? So when we tackle
Sure.
that one as an example right now. But, you know, to go back to the beginning of your question, yeah, so dialogue, for those who may not know, we are architects, planners, engineers, like we are in the design side of things. And in our sense of purpose, our why is to meaningfully improve the well-being of communities. we see that social procurement is one really important tool in that toolbox. There's many other things that we need to be doing, right? So, but this is a really important tool, and one that has the ability to get cash into the hands of the people who need it, right? For a variety of reasons. And now the pandemic. So through the pandemic, one of the things that has transpired is, of course, we've discovered that the virus doesn't hit people equally. Quite the contrary, it's a hugely unequal public health issue, right? So there's been a huge polarization of the impact of the pandemic. So in fact, as a society, we've been further polarized, and this has transpired in neighborhoods, it's transpired in demographics, it's transpired in a number of things. And the data exists. We know, we can now observe what are the parts of our communities that have been further impacted. It behooves us to now use the tools that we have, social procurement being one of those, to really understand, look at some of these marginalized, impacted, vulnerable communities and try and put two and two together, right? So, you know, as we're trying to come out of this problem, but many other issues that we face as a society, we really need to be looking at the tools that we do have at our disposal. And social procurement, as Tim describes from the business side, is pretty straightforward, and there's a really strong business case. From the public sector side, from the procurement side, it's also, there's a strong business case because, hey, they can just make it a requirement. It suddenly becomes a level playing field if everybody that they're asking to submit bids is required to present a social procurement aspect to their bid. So levels the playing field. And now the public sector, without having to spend money, right, is all of a sudden improving the well-being of these marginalized, vulnerable communities within its society, right? So again, there's a really strong business case in the sense that public sector has the ability to use policy, to use their procurement methodologies to get money into the hands of the people who need it.
Right. And Roger, from your perspective, you know, obviously the city is uniquely positioned, the municipality is uniquely positioned kind of in the middle of all this, right? And to Antonio's point that, you know, you're kind of the, without having to spend more dollars, you can do community good. And, you know, a mission of the city is to do community good as well and look out for citizens and all the rest. So I'm wondering, you know, from your procurement department, like, do you see yourself positioned that way? And what does that look like for you as a, I guess, a business case or a municipal case?
Yeah, I think it's like, for me, it's less about procurement. For me, from a procurement perspective, it's one more requirement or an plunk one out, put one in. We can shift pretty easily and put criteria in our procurements in order to influence this. Where I see the biggest benefit is coming back to Tim's example of, you've got someone that potentially is basically a draw on the programs and the services in the community, and trying to leverage, you know, whatever type of programs are out there to support marginalized groups or barriered groups. And this helps to promote and offer opportunity for that individual to become a, you know, a community member that's contributing and you know, living in the community rather than drawing on that community, right? So if we build on that example of, think of the impact that that community member, that individual, so you take the kid and say, hey, you know, now you're earning a good income, you can actually maybe, you know, get a reasonable place for yourself, you can support others, and then think of the messaging that person's out there putting out to the community and saying, hey, look at these programs that are out there, look at the opportunities that are here. And so really it's about opening up those doors. And so the business case on the city, pretty simple, just to add another item on our procurement, or like I say, substitute. It's not a huge piece of work. Certainly some effort on the business community and our supplier community to, you know, develop relationships and connections in order for them to be able to respond to our procurement and put bids together to say, yeah, hey, we've got social benefit programs that we can offer. And then the impacts really at that community level. So we feel there's really an importance of how do we help? Because my effort's pretty minimal from that procurement piece. So from my perspective, it's how do I help the supplier community? How do we create those connections between those workforce development groups? Like, we're quite focused on the employment side of things, and there's a whole bunch of other categories around supply chain and community engagements and such, but keeping it a little simpler in terms of how do we help those suppliers create those connections and be able to be prepared to respond to bids, whether it's for the city or whether it's for some other opportunities within the industry, so that they can be prepared to identify, here's what we've built, here's what we've got put together, and be able to actually win work and develop contracts that integrate social benefit community or social community benefits.
Right.
Roger, I just add to that. When I was living in Calgary, I was quite involved with the United Way, actually when I was in Edmonton as well. And there's a lot of research out there on social ROI, and the number that I'm just going to pull from the hip here, we'll have to double check it, but for every dollar spent to fight poverty, there's a $3 savings to the social system. So in my scenario where we can take an at-risk youth and have that individual have a path towards a high-paying job in construction in 5 years, it costs us nothing to do that. So zero cost to Chandos. But when we do that, we're reducing the strain on the Canadian social system. Ergo, government and municipalities saying, you know what, we should say 20% of the selection criteria or 15% of the selection criteria should be based on that contractor's ability to reduce the strain on the social system. So at that individual, if they were in poverty or crime, probably would cost the Canadian social system $300,000 a year. So it costs us nothing to get there. We're putting $100,000 of tax revenue back into the system, and we're avoiding $300,000 of cost. That's the math on this stuff, right? Per person.
So I want to pivot a little bit, because I think you're obviously preaching to the choir for me. Like, I'm super excited about this. I think we have like very rosy conversations about this, but obviously there's some barriers here. There's some misconceptions. So I do want to get into the other side, because I imagine there's people listening to this going like, yeah, but Antonio saying it doesn't cost anymore. I don't know. It seems like this is going to cost more. It seems. So Brad, I'm going to turn to you first, and just, what are some of the, I think, misconceptions or perceived or real barriers to something like social procurement from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I guess if you look at it from a competitive, we've got competitors, and that everybody knows that, right? So when Tim puts out a job, it's not just A&H bidding on that job, right? So, and there's a lot of factors that I'm sure Tim is looking at and his team are looking at when they decide who the contractor is that works. And so when we're bidding, of course, price is the focus, right? Where should we be for price, where this makes sense both for the general contractor and for us to be able to do a high quality job. And sometimes the need is to be able to cut a cost somewhere. And so when you look at, okay, well, if we're going to have to cut costs somewhere, if we're going to have to trim somewhere, where do we do that? Can we do it in the field somewhere? Like I said, I'm not going to, how do I say that? We work really closely with the union. And so the wages are fixed, right? It's a good wage for people. So we can't cut costs there, but some people might look at it and be like, maybe if I get workers from somewhere else that will work for a little less, maybe if I get products and goods and services from out of country, it's less, and then maybe I can get the bid through and maybe it'll get accepted. So there is that thing of like, well, how do I cut costs and spend a little bit more money to pay people a better wage, or to put back into the community where we start to create that ripple effect? Who's going to be the first one to do it, right? And is it consistent where it's sustainable across all the companies, all the GCs, right? So if A&H spends time and money to create this social procurement, but it's only going to benefit us with certain contractors, that becomes the same sustainability issue as well. So there's I think that that's probably where a lot of people are looking at, because at the end of the day, I mean, we need to keep our people employed. Otherwise, it's counterproductive, right? If we have to lay off half of our workforce because, we couldn't get the work, now we're putting people back in the system, which is counterproductive. So there is that concern about how do we do this where it makes sense for a company on a consistent basis to be able to look at this as a viable way and see the benefit of like, hey, it does make my bid look that much more attractive, because as a company, we really are spending time on local, on social procurement and looking at how can we benefit our local community. So I think as long as people are stuck between a cost benefit analysis, like which one makes more, I think that what we'll see is that companies will still have to default back to, whatever makes the most sense financially. Because like I said, we got to keep the doors open. So I think that's something we're going to have to somehow address. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to create a culture in the construction industry where this becomes something that everybody just does because that's what we do? And there isn't competitiveness in that aspect. It's just everybody does it. And then it goes back to, we just bid the job, but everybody's doing the same thing. So it's all equitable.
Yeah, Tim and Antonio, I see you both nodding along with that statement. And Tim, obviously, Chandos has thought about this, is figuring this out at a national level. So just wondering your take on that and some of the I think tensions that I'm hearing a little bit in what Brad's saying.
So there's a few themes around the opposition to social procurement. So I'm going to touch on two of them. One of them is there's this kind of a sense of how dare government tell us who we're going to hire. And, I'm not going to use names here, but there are people who have said, how dare you force us to hire Indigenous women, LGBTQ, new Canadians? If you force us to do that, you're forcing us to hire labor from an inferior labor pool. They've actually said that in writing. Which is one of the most racist things I've ever heard. Beyond that, there is a widely held perception that social procurement will cost the taxpayer more. And there is no real research on it. And so what ends up happening is you get a bunch of apocryphal stories from people who repeat the story, and it's not really rooted in truth and research and fact. And it's the Jungle Telegraph story, and there's a lot of misconceptions. I would also say, I should say this for the audience, there's been a lot of issues with the government of British Columbia's position on community benefit agreements. So they've conflated social procurement and a CBA with a PLA, which is a mandated use of labor on a particular project. I don't think that's appropriate. There should be fair and open access to labor on projects. And so because they conflated those two things, there's been this whole other series of misconceptions around social procurement. But separating those out, there still remains a challenge around, does it cost more for the Canadian taxpayer? And so one of our clients in British Columbia is underwriting a significant research study that's looking at social procurement projects across Canada and trying to address the question of whether it costs more. And the interesting thing is, as soon as you ask the question, does it cost more? You have to ask the question, well, how did you do it? Because you can do it the wrong way and it will cost more. And you can do it the right way and it won't cost more. And so where we've come with that is that research that's happening is being paired with a guide to social procurement, broken down by the four main delivery types, or delivery methods, the CCDC contracts. By Social Canada in Vancouver is quarterbacking that. That guide is being released next week. And it's got a wide cross-section of industry support, from architects to construction associations, to general contractors, to trade partners, to social enterprises. We're really happy about that. So for the first time, there's going to be shared common understanding about what is it, what does it count, what counts, how do you do it, and does it cost more? And all of those things are happening here in the next few months. So I think that's going to really advance the conversation around social procurement in terms of policy in Canada.
Right. And then
Brooks,
a response. Oh yeah, please go
well,
ahead.
No, just now I'm jumping.
Yeah, please.
because you can see everybody like wants to kind of jump in. But, you know, to the question of barriers, you know, what's running in my mind is trying to discern systemic barriers versus just logistical barriers, right? And I would argue that right at this stage, the biggest barrier we have is simply momentum. And I'll give you an example. So in the 70s, industry was spewing pollutants into the air, right? And everybody was saying, oh, we can't change policies, you know, we can't change our business model. And then acid rain happened. And very quickly, everybody kind of reorganized. There was policy, there was requirements. And then the business models re-leveled, right? That level competitive field kind of readjusted. And now it seems like a very natural thing to have transpired. You know, frankly, we're facing a little bit of the same right now with carbon and with a number of other things. This is that awkward phase of not having the momentum. We have this sense of purpose, we have these things, but many businesses don't have the inertia to get there. And a lot of municipalities and procurement agencies don't have the inertia. So things perceptibly are barriers, which inherently is just it's a moment, a logistical moment of like, get over the hump, get going, get, you know, Roger to embed it into every procurement RFP that goes out there, get businesses to kind of start being able to put it into their balance sheets. It's just picking up that momentum in my mind.
Yeah. And okay, I want to just put a pin in that for half a second because I want to come back. Tim, you talked about the how dare government get involved in who we hire and that. But I heard at the beginning you said like that's the kind of key business case here. That is like a crux of this is that you do get good employees, you get really solid workers out of this process. So I'm wondering, like, when you hear that, for example, and someone says like, well, how dare you get involved in hiring and telling us who we should hire? And to Brad's point, like that lowest common denominator where we can, shave costs here or there. Like, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of thought process, in particular in the construction industry. You know, we are resistant to change, I would say. I remember when the LEED rating system was a thing in the early 2000s. And government was starting to think about, well, maybe we should say that all of the buildings we build are LEED certified or LEED silver. People in the construction industry were lighting themselves on fire. Like, how dare you tell me where I'm going to buy my rooftop units or whatever? And what do you mean? I'm going to buy local? Like, come on. You know, I remember all of that. I remember people saying it was going to cost 20% more. And oh my God. And at the end of the day, that's just something we do now on public buildings. And I think part of the role of government is to raise the floor. And a lot of folks push back and recoil in horror at being told to do something by government. But I think that's really one of the roles there, is to help industry make these sorts of change happen. And so our approach at Chandos is, okay, well, we can fight the change and resist it and have all the arguments why we don't like it. Or we can say it's coming, we're embracing it, we're going to help government figure out how to do this. We think this is good for society. And frankly, there's all sorts of differentiation and there's all sorts of advantages to that sort of an approach. And, you know, we welcome others to take that kind of a viewpoint.
Yeah. So I've heard momentum and this is coming. So Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's talk about what those opportunities are on the horizon. Like, how do we get that momentum? How do we start to push over that? I know the City of Edmonton is a leader in this. So yeah, from your perspective, like, where does this momentum come from and what opportunities are coming on the horizon?
Well, I think there's a few avenues there. I mean, the simplest is we put it out there and like some of the conversation says, let business figure it out to a degree, right? Let the community, the industry figure things out of, I'm going to ask for it and then I'm going to see what I get back. We're certainly putting things out there, and I think we have to put things in context too of, you know, we're not looking at putting our work out at 80 or 100% social procurement criteria. This becomes, you know, honestly, our kind of range is in that 5 to 15, and I think Tim threw out 20, but, you know, in terms of weighting of our scorings. And so it's a starting point. I think it's a maturity, you know, I look at the whole path of this as a maturity model where let's start here and let's grow it and improve it as we mature and as we work through it all together. Because This is a whole business community initiative. So that's one piece of it in terms of how do we get this. The other piece is creating the conversations, creating the opportunities for knowledge sharing, for exploring and determining how we do this. So, you know, there's another number of initiatives and conversations happening around, like we've got with End Poverty Edmonton, there's a coalition within at least the Edmonton area of, you know, putting some groups together to create some conversation, talk about what are the barriers, how do we expand, how do we create those connections between suppliers and workforce development or social enterprises, or, you know, supply chain activities in order to create those opportunities. And that's where I really look at, you know, that collaboration between all those groups and all those members is really what's going to help to solidify this and really make it as impactful as we're seeing in terms of some of the environmental references.
Yeah. So I do want to open this up to the rest of the group too. Antonio, you talked about momentum. I'm wondering, like, how do we get this momentum? Like, what opportunities do you see on the horizon? What have you seen out there that makes you, you know, encourages you around social procurement?
Frankly, it's staff. It's the next generation, right? It's the people bubbling up right below us, right? Like this is it, right? There's you know, we do a lot of our per people surveys, and I'm sure Tim, Brett, like everybody, like tried to figure out like why do people want to be where they are, right? And salary is a huge part. You know, the convenience of work, all of these things, but feeling like they make a difference in the world, like that their work and their, you know, their sweat equity is contributing to something bigger makes a huge difference. It's a huge motivator. So, you know, I think that this is going to happen, right? And you can see it just bubbling up. And certainly I have a huge hope and admiration for that generation that is bubbling up underneath us. And I would challenge most businesses right now, they have the opportunity to be a leader in this. But in 10 years, they're going to be way behind if you don't do something. And you're going to lose all the staff and you're not going to be motivating. And that next generation is going to go somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like seize the moment or be left behind.
Well put.
Antonio, there's a great stat on that. 85% of that generation believe that companies have a moral obligation to solve societal issues. You want to win the war for talent, you got to deal with that.
And you can see it on a number of different fronts, right? So investment funds are now having an equity perspective into them, right? Certainly kind of the hiring, but even kind of topics at universities, like almost in any sector that you pick is starting to really acknowledge that equity has a huge role to play, and people are making their lifestyle choices, their employment choices, their business practices choices based on it. And, you know, good for them.
Yeah. So I just opened up the Q&A and we have some good questions in here. So I want to kind of move and we can jump back into, you know, our conversation, but I just want to focus on a couple of these questions. And Roger, I believe this one's for you, but everybody can answer this. Is working on social procurement can result in healthy design and construction industry, but how do we get over the barrier of trade agreements? Not hiring through locally for design and construction expertise will not allow our community to mature. So Roger, I guess I'm wondering about those trade agreements and you know, what is that? What's the impact there and how do we resolve that?
So actually, I think social procurement provides our opportunity within the trade agreements. So those trade agreements for those that don't live it every day, like we can't prefer local. Like it's right in there where public entities cannot prefer local. However, social procurement criteria within our RFPs are not considered preferring local. So by integrating these criteria or entering into community employment benefit agreements, community benefit agreements. Those are certainly within the opportunity of the trade agreement. So we look at it as this is our chance to benefit the community, but still be in compliance with our trade agreements. And so, like I say, social procurement, I think, is our opportunity to help that out.
Right. The next question, thanks, Roger. The next question that we have is, and I think this one speaks to, Tim, what you were talking about with some subcontracting and the rest, which is, do you believe social procurement will cascade into private business as much as public? So obviously we've talked to Roger and we've looked at municipalities and how, you know, larger infrastructure projects are utilizing this. But I'm wondering from your perspective, and Brad as well, you know, how will this cascade into private business as much as public?
Yeah, I would say so. There's kind of two streams in the social procurement world. A lot of it came out of the UK, government of Scotland. And so there's a public stream. Mm-hmm. And most people in Canada don't realize that there is a just as robust, if not stronger, stream coming out of the United States. There's a group called the Coalition for Impact Sourcing. And it was founded by Google and Facebook and SAP, the big tech companies in the Bay Area. And it's exactly the same thing, but applied to big private owners that are publicly traded. And so, yeah, we have an NDA on this thing, so I can't use the name, but we're responding to an RFP for a large software company from San Francisco that wants to build a massive data campus in Calgary, like huge. And we've got a JV partner with us on that out of the US. 35% of the selection criteria is social procurement. Well, this is a big deal, you know, down in the US. So there's that. And then I would also say, I've been pretty overt about this. General contractors need to do a better job of this. And so it's one thing for Roger, the City of Edmonton, to say, okay, we're going to have 15% of the selection criteria for Chandos or PCL or Delnor or whoever to be based on your ability to do social procurement. But we actually have to do that ourselves in our supply chain. So when we put out an RFP, and we're getting numbers on rebar, we're not just grabbing the lowest number and the trade that's $4,000 low, because that's the spread on rebar. The trade that is, we're just going to close our eyes and give the contract to them. We need to start saying, Brad, what are you doing? Harris, what are you doing? And include that in our procurement process as general contractors. We control 85% of the supply chain in the construction industry. And I think there's a huge opportunity for general contractors to lead on this.
Yeah, Brad,
yeah,
please.
Yeah, if I build on that too, and something Antonio said is that in the recruitment aspect, I am starting to see that salary is not the main driving factor for a lot of people. They ask a lot of questions about our culture. A lot of questions, you know, what are your values? How do you live your values in your culture? You know, what do you do for your employees that makes life better for them? And when we start to speak about the social aspect of it, they do perk up, you know, like we have to offer more than just a really good salary. That, you know, things are changing. And I think that, you know, I'm not a firm believer in that, you know, the younger generation is lazy. I just think that what motivates them is different. And if the only thing you can offer that generation is a good salary and a title, their output isn't going to be there. Right. So as far as private goes, there is a strong case to be made for, you know, maybe we should be focusing on some of this other stuff. And you know, something else about the government involvement and mandating certain things. One thing about that is it forces us as private businesses to get more curious about what does that look like, right? You know, how do we stick to what we've always done and that mindset that, you know, a rod buster looks like this. And so you can't have women, or you can't have, you know, this group of people, you can't have that. And when it becomes mandated, it's like, okay, well, if we have to, let's go take a look. And oh, look, surprise, surprise. You know, there are a lot of people out there that we didn't think would make good rebar people, and they're fantastic. You know, I look at it like trying to get my kid to try carrots. It's like, well, you don't know until you try it. And if I have to force not getting iPad time after dinner to try a carrot, and then he tries it, he's like, oh, okay, you know what? That's not too bad. I can do this. then it does. So there is place for private business to be able to take on that. And I think the motivation will start to come, as Antonio said, as the tide starts to change. The businesses that aren't paying attention are going to find it harder and harder and harder to find people. And if, to what Tim's pointing to, harder and harder to get, bids through.
I like that, Tim, for your the guidebook you were talking about. Social procurement, it's like getting your kids to eat carrots, which is that's good. That could be a tagline on that.
You could hashtag that or something. Yeah.
So I'm just go ahead, Antonio.
Well, I was just going to kind of build a little bit on this and put out a challenge out there, because in many regards, businesses are the closest to community, right? Like federal government is like right up there, and the level at which they can create policy is going to be very generic. Businesses have the ability to be very specific. So hence the challenge or the invitation is to actually get engaged with the community and try and figure out like who are the vulnerable, who are the marginalized, and who do you want to support, right? Tim has been very conscious around who are the elements in communities that you really want to support. The different communities and different businesses will be different. So the invitation is like, have those conversations, engage, tap into your people, right? Because we can, by nuancing how we do social procurement, be incredibly surgical with our communities and really support well-being in a way that, maybe the huge overarching motherhood, public sector has a hard time getting to that level.
And I would argue too that there's a lot of services and products that we currently don't tap into and don't know about that are really, really good, right? Like I think those community, diverse businesses in our communities, local businesses provide a lot of really, really solid services that we could utilize that would make our businesses better, right? Like the talent is there. I think the capacity is there. It's just a matter of, shining the focus in that direction.
Yeah.
I think
and I saw it in.
Sorry, Antonio, go ahead.
Please.
Sorry, what I think and what I heard Antonio say is, going back to your employees and saying, where do you want to make a difference? Like I know one of the things that we ran up when I first started is that, United Way was something we were doing. And we found that our employees were not that engaged because the level of contribution we could make, it was kind of like, well, we can donate $4,000 or $5,000 to Shandos to add to their thing, but their level of engagement with that wasn't there. And when the school idea came up, it's like, hey, look, that same $5,000, we can now build a personal connection with that school and those kids. All of a sudden, it completely changed, right? So to Antonio's point is that private business needs to go back to their employees and to the people they're hiring and the people they're working with. Like, hey, where do you want to make an impact? We don't have to decide as the leaders of the company. You decide where we want to go. You decide who the people we're going to hire are going to want to have the most impact on. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to your point, Antonio, is like, that's what it actually looked like kind of on the court for A&H, is we did have to ask that question.
So I recognize that we're getting to the end of our time here. So I just wanted to put a question out, and maybe I'll just kind of scattershot this to the group and we can all jump in. But, for the audience here, obviously there's going to be people on the call that are thinking practically now, like, what is my next step? I'm interested in this. I've been listening to this. So what are some practical ways that you can engage in your company? Obviously, all of you at various different levels have been engaging in this in your institutions and your companies. So what's a first step here, or what's a step in the right direction, do you think?
I could start with that. For us, you got to look this, like do the Venn diagram analysis, right? So there's the business model that you have that you do every day. And there's also kind of the purpose, the culture of your workforce and what's important to them. And look for the overlap with that, and also societal need in your community, wherever your community is. And you connect those three dots. And I think you find something that's pretty powerful when you work through that. And I would encourage, get a group of people together, do the whiteboard session, sticky notes, however you want to do it, but get a wide cross section involved in the conversation. And sorry, just for us, the thing that made let's target at-risk youth really work, because we need people like crazy. When was the last time you heard of a 13-year-old kid who wants to be a plumber, kind of a thing, right?
Right.
That's a problem. And our superintendents want to mentor. And so there's this nice connection in the middle of all of that, right?
Antonio, I seen you came off.
Yeah, and something that I've always found very powerful is empower a couple of people in your organization to become champions, right? And to hold all of us accountable, right? Because as we often see, nothing happens in an organization unless somebody is really kind of championing and wanting to run with it, right? So you will probably find that, you know, there's somebody who this would really be motivational, but you haven't empowered them to do anything about it, right? So identify those folks, give them some free rein, right? But then have the ability to actually hold the organization accountable, right? Set some targets, set some goals, get the ball rolling. And frankly, there's probably no wrong way to start and get the ball rolling. Just kind of find whatever works for you to get these conversations going. It will probably lead you into a better place than where you are today.
Yeah. Roger, how about you?
Well, I'd say we probably had a little bit more of a top-down approach. We certainly went to council with, here's what we're recommending and proposing, and they supported and bought in and said, yep, put it into policy. But I'd say like it's really about, you know, empowering and having the conversation and getting people informed. I've been doing a roadshow with a lot of our groups within the city of Edmonton. And as soon as we talk about this, like everybody just, the engagement, you can just see it. The excitement really starts to show, and people create that connection. And I think Brad's example of, hey, we're putting money towards you know, this, like the United Way. But if we can create a connection and make it more personal for folks and make it more focused, it hits in a different fashion, right? And so everyone's going to take their nuance, but you can give great examples. And that, to me, it's really about getting informed, reaching out and getting connected. You know, there's tons of support in the community. I can speak for Edmonton, but it'll be across Alberta, expanding past there as well. But you know, just create a conversation, have a coffee with somebody, and you know, really question and create opportunities for that different way of thinking.
Brad.
Yeah, what they said.
Yeah.
I mean, everything they said resonates. I think it starts with looking at the problems the company face. Like when you run into like, okay, we have a problem, like we did. We have a problem. We're running out of people for the field. And then starting to look at it and understanding that we've created a context as a company that we operate in. We've got a lot of long-term employees, and this is kind of the way that we've always done things, and the way we've done them has always worked. Then we've got this new problem, and we start to apply what has always worked in the past to the new problem, and then we get stopped out. So rather than trying to force an old context on a new problem, start to expand that, right? You know, think, when they say think outside the box, it's cliche, but start to look at, okay, well, what if we didn't, you know, what if we couldn't do it that way? What if it really just wasn't an option? You know, what if, you know, going out into the country and putting up flyers and to hire farm kids isn't the way to do this anymore? Then what would we do? Oh, okay, well, we'd have to go do this or that. So the sticky notes on the board, everybody's got a good idea. I heard somebody talk about cross sections. I can't remember what it was, but, you know, bringing like people who don't normally operate in that department in and be like, what do you see? Because their level of ignorance to how that part works can actually be a huge benefit. You know, I've got 2 years of experience in the construction industry. I came from like a coaching and people background. So a lot of my ideas, people kind of look at me and be like, that's kind of weird, but it might actually work, right? So having that ability to bring people in that wouldn't normally contribute to that conversation is really, really, really important. And then taking those new ideas to the stakeholders and to the you know, whoever, the people in the company that are making decisions, like, hey, we think this can work. And then to Roger's point, the top says, yeah, you know what, it gives them the freedom to like, let's go try it. It might not work, but I'm going to give you the time, which is a big one, right? We maybe don't have a lot of resources, but we're going to give you the time to go and do that and see what happens. We'll give you time during work or whatever, right? Go figure it out and let us know how it works. So I think that's the big piece is, you know, get curious. You know, what if we did it a different way? What if we modified? So I think, like I said, everybody who has spoken, I would agree with everything they said. And I would just add that as one extra level is be curious about what have we always done that isn't working anymore.
Yeah. And as I guess a shameless plug, or maybe not so shameless, you know, End Poverty Edmonton, it plays a role in this and can help you. To Roger's point, there are community supports out there, and you know, groups like End Poverty Edmonton. There's certainly organizations in Calgary and frankly across the country that are doing this work of convening people, having conversations, helping companies understand where they can have a real impact in community, where they can hire from, what social enterprises exist, what local businesses exist, where they can purchase from. So, you know, certainly I believe, Thomas, you're going to share some information on End Poverty Edmonton, but locally here in Edmonton, like, we're here to help and play the role and frankly, to have more of these types of conversations, because I could talk with you guys all day about this, right? And I'm sure we could get deeper and deeper into the nuance of this. And then there are, you know, to Tim's point earlier, there are some really great resources. Buy Social Canada is doing amazing work at a national level and working with us locally here, providing information and support. So check out their websites. And yeah, there's models happening elsewhere that we're trying to incorporate in Edmonton and make sure that this is not only something that you want to do, but you can do in an efficient and effective way. So, you know, that's kind of we talked about momentum earlier. To me, it's also, there's a momentum piece there where the community is really coalescing and coming around this. And I think we'll be able to make this something that is frankly easier than probably the way you're doing business now. So thank you all so very much. I knew we'd go long, and like I said, we could probably talk here for another few hours, but I'll turn it over to Thomas to wrap us up because we are over 10 o'clock. So thanks everyone. This was really brilliant. And I hope that this conversation continues in a bunch of different formats. So Thomas, over to you.
Thanks so much, Brooks, and thank you so much to our panelists. This has been an incredible introduction to social procurement, and really appreciate having your guys' insights and lenses to each of this. So thank you so much, Antonio, Tim, Roger, and Brad. Thank you so much for sharing your various perspectives. If I could offer a virtual round of applause, by all means, you can hear it in the background. So it's there. And following, I'd specifically like to thank the team at End Poverty Edmonton, where they've been a really great support in developing this event. We, with the YBG and the YP Merge Group, came up with just seeing that there's an opportunity here, and I think weren't really certain on where to go with this, but a few conversations just started just at a spark and eventually flamed into the event that we have here today. And there is more to come. So thank you so much, Brooks, for you and your team, Susanna, Andrea, for your support from End Poverty Edmonton. You've been an incredible group to be working with. And I'm happy to be promoting a connection back from all of our members here, all of our attendees, and leveraging the network, the connection, the knowledge, everything that you guys have is at the disposal of the team here and people attending. So thanks so much for that offer. Finally, I'd like to thank the Edmonton Construction Association for Matt, Johnny, and the whole team there for putting on the event. It's been great to have you guys operating in the background and be promoting this. This is the exact kind of conversation that our associations need to be championing and facilitating on behalf of all of our member organizations. We're definitely benefiting from that. So thank you. But if I can offer the largest, maybe strongest thank you is to all of our attendees. This is something that needs to be addressed, needs to be spoken to, but especially needs to be heard. So hopefully what you've learned or you've connected to here today has given you a bit of an inspiration, or maybe even just language, context for conversation, whatever it might be. Really, thank you for being here and being receptive to what we have to share, but also being receptive to the opportunity and to meeting the needs of your organization while meeting the needs of our communities at the same time. So it's really, really impactful. A couple of the closing points that I just wanted to touch on. There are quite a number of questions about how do we do this? What are examples of criteria? What's next? How are agencies and institutions actually doing this. So that's where I'm really excited to see that this is just the start of the conversation that we're trying to facilitate here through the Edmonton Construction Association and YP Merge. There's an event being developed that will provide a lot of the nitty-gritty details, really try and get into the weeds on how do you do it, how do you respond to a proposal, how do you develop a proposal, all of those different dynamics. And Poverty Edmonton being a part of that support network and developing that by Social Canada, City of Edmonton, all of these institutions that have a stake in CNET Advance will be a part of developing it, but especially from the association side and making sure that our industry is supported. You'll see that from the various associations that support the numerous sectors that really advocate for development, engineering, construction, everything here in the Edmonton area. So those are a few plugs that I would like to keep you tuned to. There is, I see that my link here isn't actually the correct link. What I wanted to draw a connection to is to the City of Edmonton has some great content, and this will provide some insights to specific rating or weighting areas where you can articulate the benefit of your organization. The city's page here on social procurement, well, on sustainable procurement specifically, has a number of categories, and it really elevate the attention to the social value considerations, where there are a number of excellent points that really provide the context to how the City of Edmonton is advancing this. And finally, we had a PDF that I was going to try to attach, but I don't believe we have the abilities to do that with the Zoom webinar setup that we have. So we're going to be putting a piece that's been developed by Poverty Edmonton. Really unfortunate that I couldn't actually share it with you, maybe even screen share, just to give you a bit of a taste on what's there. But draw your attention to that when it comes out. We'll be sending out some further information from this event. The recording for this event, we've wanted to make it live for each of you to take back to your organizations, to watch again, to send to your coworkers that maybe missed this. There will be further opportunities to connect. And specifically on that note, I invite you to all connect back with all of us. Any of the people that you see here on the panel, they're open to being harassed, invited with questions, and especially the team at End Poverty Edmonton. So. And Brooks, I see you dropped your email into the chat line. So thanks for posting that there. If you want to connect directly with Brooks, which is an excellent leaping point to any of the initiatives in Edmonton, you can see that right there.
Yeah, please get in touch.
So finally, if I can close with that, just as being social procurement, these social initiatives, just being a mechanism, a way to help solve the needs and the solutions and provide solutions to the problems that your own organization has while meeting the needs that our communities have. So on that note, have a great day, and we look forward to continuing in this conversation with you in the months and years to come. Thanks so much.
See you.
Thanks, everyone.